Hello everybody and welcome. It's great to know that you're all there today. My name is Pippa Glucklich. I'm former CEO at Starcom and Dents Regis Group and a former president of WACL and very active member of WACL and also a trustee at NABS. So it's a great pleasure to be here with a stellar panel who's going to introduce themselves today. And I'm conscious that our session is sort of towards the end of a day of a whole load of sessions. And our areas really that we're here to talk about is what can we learn from the gender pay gap when it comes to ethnicity. This comes under the overall theme that Mediatel have put together, Standing Shoulder to Shoulder, which was the title, I'm sure you all read, a very powerful piece on Mediatel written by Michaela Jefferson. So thank you to Michaela if she's here, if she's tuning in, and also to Mediatel for creating an event that tackles this important topic. Specifically, this whole event is designed around encouraging action. So debate is important, but really it's action. And that's something that I'm speaking on behalf of all of our panelists when I say we all feel really strongly that we've all done a lot of talking. What we need is some clear direction on what business leaders could and should do. So in the 30 minutes we've got, what we really hope is to give you some clear direction and actions to do within your businesses. It's also important to say that you will see people's contact details and Twitter handles coming up. Because this is a pre-recorded session, we're all happy to take kind of questions or responses if there's things that come up for you that you'd like to have a point of view on. So, as I said, this particular panel is about learnings. I'm just going to do a brief intro that we could take from around the gender pay gap. Now that it is mandatory to report, although I'm sure you all know it was only actually made the law back in 2017, with the first data being released in 2018. So it's very, very recent. In light of Black Lives Matter movement and particularly what's happened in the last month or so, what can we take from that when it comes to ethnicity to ensure that everyone is paid fairly and equally, as is correct, regardless of their gender or their ethnicity? And I think we can all agree commitment to diversity needs to be at the top of every single business agenda. So just thinking about what's happened in gender, which is the sort of starting point, I guess, before we bounce into this topic around ethnicity, is of course there's been some progress to make gender parity is a much more prominent issue than it was in the past, particularly in business. But even after decades of trying, it's painfully and unacceptably slow. So there are some learnings from the gender pay situation, but sadly not as many as we would all hope, not as many positive ones. So the regulations, as I said, for employers of 250 and more came into effect in 2017, and they had to publish the data on their gender pay gaps. Sadly, as I expect you all know, enforcement of the reporting for the year 2019-20 has been suspended by the government. It's not something I agree with at all, because they've said businesses have got other things on their agenda. But I think, of course, everyone's got lots on their agenda, but this should be, as I said earlier, right at the very top, gender and all pay reporting and equality generally. So the COVID crisis, people think, has been disastrous for ethnicity groups, but women's progress particularly, and there's a real fear that women will be most impacted. So a lot of the positive gains that may have been seen in pay and at work for women will probably be set back as a result of the COVID crisis. So just to put the gender pay gap in context, the World Economic Forum reports it's going to take over 200 years to close the gender pay gap at the current pace of change. That was pre-COVID. It's even worse now as a result of COVID. So we don't know, and that's something we're going to come on to talk about, what that looks like for ethnicity, because no one's required to report that yet. We hope that's going to change. And that's something that's going to come up, but I can only imagine that it's even worse. So I've got an absolutely cracking panel, and I'm so excited to bring all these people together. So I'm just going to hand over going to do brief intros, then I'm just going to follow on, and then we'll get cracking on the session. So can I ask who wants to kick off first? SJ?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Sarah Jenkins. I'm the Managing Director at Saatchi here in London.
Supriya, do you want to go next?
Sure, I can go next. Hi everyone, I'm Supriya. I'm Commercial Director at ForwardPMX in London.
And hello, I'm Rupen. I'm Head of Planning at Thinkbox, the trade marketing body for commercial TV. And I also recently joined Media for All as a mentor. And Media for All is an organisation set up to help BAME talent come into the industry and then provide a support network so that they can stay within the industry and rise to the top. Prior to that, I spent, lots of time in agencies.
Brilliant. So as you can see, a really stellar panel, and I think it's a really interesting debate. So an action plan. So what we thought when we were prepping for this is, rather than just kind of have a general debate, we wanted to tackle some real areas that we think need to be surfaced and that businesses should be thinking about. So the way we've decided to do that is each panelist is going to lead off on one based on their own knowledge of it and hopefully potentially some personal experience that they've had. But obviously there will be perspectives and interjections from the wider panel. So the three areas are the importance of tracking and measurement. So it's, as we've talked about, it's law for gender, but it isn't the law that you have to track this for ethnicity. And it's much harder information to collate than it is for gender. But it's still, it's exceptionally important. And the old adage of what's get measured gets done is really, really true. So SJ is going to kick us off on that. Rupen, after that, is going to talk about the legal situation on equal pay when it comes to BAME employees. And shockingly, and I have to hands up, this was news to me, so thank you, Rupen, for sharing this with us. Ethnicity isn't specifically covered in the Equal Pay Act, which dates back to 1970, which only covers gender and none of the other protected characteristics. So Rupen's going to talk to us a bit about that, and importantly, what businesses can be doing. And then Supriya is going to talk about, we know it's really important to collect data and that the law needs to catch up, but actually, what is the mindset change that businesses need to see? So how do you need to think about everyone? Because categorization is a very blunt tool. Unlike gender, there are massive disparities in ethnicity and it varies hugely from group to group. So for business leaders, what we need to do is understand the identity of each single employee as an individual and look at them as the whole person. So I hope that sounds interesting, and now we're going to get stuck in. I'll shut up. SJ, talk to us about track targets, not just why we need to do it, but how should we be going about it?
Well, thank you, Pippa, and I'm so glad that I get to talk about measurement because it's definitely what's happened and it's definitely needed. Gender pay gap's interesting because when it was first introduced, everyone was like, "Oh, it's not going to work. It's a blunt metric. It's not the right." The truth is, it is data, and any data is good so long as it's sourced properly. So I love the fact that we are held accountable by the gender pay gap, and we need the same for ethnicity too. So long as you have some data, you can start moving forward. If you haven't got any data, you can't know your problem. If you don't know the problem, you can't find a solution. It's that simple and absolute. So yeah, you're right. The challenge, you can buy into the fact that data is needed, but the challenge is how you get it. And the only way you can get it is through self-completion. You can't expect people to go around with a clipboard. You can't expect people to be able to just fill in 3 or 4 sort of blunt boxes. Like, it's self-completion. It has to be how you identify, has to follow certain rules and protocols. And it's personal information, so that the control system that you need to put in place within your organization to make sure that data is really robust. Very, very, very few people should be able to access it. And all those things are so important to build the trust and transparency within your organization to ensure people do fill it in. So number 1, build a system that's safe and secure and accurate. And then number 2, do everything you can to create a culture where people feel comfortable completing it and filling it in. And I am 100% confident that every single organization on this call will be able to make this happen, because I'm very proud to say that Publicis Group announced that they've launched their own data capture program as of the 1st of this month. So if a big multinational French-based organization can find a way of capturing this data, there's definitely no excuse for anyone on this call. There is a way of making it happen. So yeah, measurement's important. There are ways of doing it, both in terms of building the system and also the importance of leadership to make sure that data is considered important and an imperative. So yeah, I'd say it has to be leadership led. I think it's important that leadership set their own KPIs so that they can be held accountable. I think it's critically important that the data, once it's collected, is published. I think we need a league table of heroes and villains because it forces change to happen quicker. And ultimately, because we can't be reliant on good citizens, I think it does need to be a government mandate. I think we need a really big stick to make sure not just our industry, but the whole of business is forced to do it. And I heard a great quote, which I can't make people think differently, but I can make them behave differently. So I'd be really, really happy to see a government mandate introduced to make sure
I agree. And I think the publishing is really important because I know when gender pay gap reporting came out, there were a lot of businesses, including the one that I worked for at the time, were kind of trying to manipulate the data. And the reality is that you can't manipulate the data. You shouldn't manipulate the data because you need, as you've said, you need to know what the problem is in order to tackle it. But I think the fact that businesses should be applauded for the fact that they are, particularly as you know, it's not the law to do it, that they should be applauded that they're doing it, that they recognise that they need to know the answer, and therefore by finding out where they currently stand is the only way to fix it. So I think that publishing it and being honest about it and having a clear action plan and not fudging it is really, really important. And that's why when I say I was so depressed when I heard that the government had said you don't have to report on gender pay, because to me it lets a lot of people off the hook and it takes us backwards, and it is absolutely essential. And if you're a good business, then you should be just doing that anyway. And I hope that some businesses, I really hope that businesses will still publish even though it's not mandatory to do so, for their employees, for their culture, so that they can be clear on how they're shifting the dial or how they're not shifting the dial.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, I mean, I think, you know, there's some stats that I heard that when, you know, up until now it's been voluntary, and actually only 11% of businesses actually sort of volunteered their information. So there's been a consultation that's been going through. There's even a petition on the government website for mandatory pay gap reporting, and it's gone over, I think it's like it stands at about 128,000 votes now. They need 100,000 for it to be debated. But an interesting stat that really sort of stuck out to me is that there's the Race at Work Charter, which has been sort of you know, put together, and it has sort of five sort of themes that businesses can sign up to. And last year, 10,000 companies published their gender pay gap data. At the moment, I looked earlier today, only 333 companies have signed up to the Race at Work Charter. So there's a massive difference. And if people aren't forced to do it, they won't do it. And it goes back to that thing, you know, if you measure what you treasure, if you think this is important, you need to measure it. And you know, if you've got the data and the board is looking at that data, then they are accountable to it. They need to do something about it. So it has to be mandatory, absolutely.
And do you think that there's enough awareness of that charter, for example? Because, you know, I'll be honest, it's not something, and I'm not, as you know, I'm taking a bit of a break at the moment, so that could be my excuse, but it's not a very good one. So, you know, even by you telling us that, there needs to be more awareness of this, because there'll be loads of people who are listening to this that will think, well, yeah, of course, I need help in this. I need to understand it. So whose responsibility is it? I mean,
yeah, I think there's responsibility for the leaders to sort of just step up and say, right, okay, well, look, what do we need to do? Be proactive. Don't wait to be told. Be proactive. You know, there was a report that was done by Dame Ruby McGregor-Smith in 2017, and then she published a sort of a follow-up on that. She's now sort of leading the Race at Work thing. So there's lots of stuff out there, and I think it's down to leaders to sort of take ownership, say, right, okay, well, I'm not going to be, you know, just not racist. I'm not going to be not just, you know, discriminatory. I'm going to be anti-racist, anti-discriminatory, and I'm going to actually put a marker in the sand and say, this is where we are, this is what we're doing. And all of the stuff that's been going on recently, all of the sort of, you know, all the you know, some of it may be virtue signaling, all of that stuff, it needs, you know, there needs to be something more behind that. It's not just about sticking a black square on your, you know, whatever profile page. It's actually doing something.
So that's sorry, just one second. That's one action everybody can do if they didn't know about that charter. go check it out now and sign up.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Supriya, sorry.
No, it's fine. I think with regards to the report that you're talking about, the race in the workplace, which was done by Baroness McGregor Smith, that was done in 2017, and she's been requesting a mandatory report to be published since 2017. So we've had what 3-4 years of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the response was that Sajid Javid, when he was in position, had commissioned this, but they really do think that it's up to the individual businesses, and this is a private matter for the businesses. It's not.
No.
It affects the entire. I mean, the public sector has taken it up, but it affects all businesses, public sector and private sector, and unless we start to demand transparency across the nation from the government itself, it's not going to change. It hasn't changed in 3-4 years. It's been around. And because it's voluntary, it's very much like other voluntary bodies that are out there. The onus is on the individual to go and do it. The onus is on the business to go and do it. If you don't know about it, how are you going to sign up to it? And I get your point about proactively going out and seeking, but it's quite difficult to find. It's actually not that easy.
So I think that's a really good segue actually into our next section, which is about the law. So I think we're all agreeing that, you know, this needs to be made mandatory. It isn't at the moment. But Rupen, as I said in the intro, I mean, you know, when we found out about this, so tell us about the Equal Pay Act at the moment and how that stands on ethnicity.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, reporting I think absolutely needs to be done, but yeah, I think that the big challenge for me, or that I've sort of noticed, is that the law doesn't actually protect people of ethnic background. So you've got the Equality Act 2010, which is the overarching sort of Equality Act, which covers all 9 protected characteristics. And then within that, there is a specific section, which is the Equal Pay Act from 1970, and that only covers gender. So within that Equal Pay Act, basically what it says is that men and women, so this piece of legislation was brought in to redress the gap between men and women. So men and women doing work of equal value should be paid equally, and it covers all terms of their employment, so holidays and all the rest of it. So that is the fundamental part of it. Now, with ethnicity, that is not covered as part of this. And I found this out through a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, who went through a really awful situation where he worked. He worked in an agency, and the senior leadership team were all white men, and he found out that he was being paid 25% less than a white male colleague. They had the same job title, they had the same role, they were seen as equals, but he'd been paid 25% less for about 4 years. So he sort of flagged this and said, look, I need this to be redressed. They said no. So he sort of launched a grievance process based on race discrimination, did some research and looked at ACAS and various other bits, and sort of found out about the wording around sort of the Equal Pay Act. And so, the company launched the process. They brought in an independent consultant who also happened to be the ex-HR director and also a shareholder. So unsurprisingly, she found there was nothing there. Then he launched an appeal, which was sort of, overseen by the CEO. And I mean, this is just, it's so bad that you have to laugh. Apparently in the meeting, one of the meetings, the CEO actually got his name wrong and called him by the name of one of the other only Asian people in the organization. This was in a race discrimination meeting. Yeah, I mean, you can't make that shit up. That's just crazy. Anyway, so they again found out or ruled that there was no discrimination. So he said, right, fine, well I'll launch a tribunal case. And he did. But what became apparent sort of fairly early on in that is that the tribunal judge in one of the preliminary hearings said that that language that you used of a comparator and equal work and so on, that cannot be used in regards to ethnicity. It only applies to gender. And the critical point about this is that with the Equal Pay Act, where there is a discrepancy between the pay of a man and a woman, it's down to the employer to justify why that discrepancy is there. You know, they have to justify why the male typically is being paid more than the woman. But in race discrimination, the onus falls on the plaintiff, the person bringing the complaint, to prove that there was discrimination. Now, you know, it's obvious that in most cases, there isn't overt discrimination. People aren't going around calling people names and so on. It happens, unfortunately, but in the vast majority of cases, it's not. So the burden of proof shifts, and that is the biggest thing. So, you know, he went through this process, and, you know, I know this guy really, really well. He suffered. He was battling by himself against, you know, the city law firm representing this company. And in the end, 1 week prior to, you know, the case being heard, they sort of settled. Basically, you know, this was a really stressful time. Everything was, you know, really difficult, and they came to a settlement agreement. But they, in one sort of final twist of the knife, they actually sort of said, you know, right, we've agreed an amount, but there's a tax-free amount that can be paid. They're going to pay a portion of that to HMRC rather than giving it to you, which is allowable. Even the ACAS people said that's the first time they've ever heard of that. It's not, you don't need to do that. But it felt like it was purely malicious, you know, right, we're going to screw you over one last time. They basically threatened to withdraw the agreement if this guy didn't agree to it. So, you know, in the end, he settled. And, you know, having spoken to him, his biggest regrets or things that sort of still, you know, eat at him are that there was no apology. You know, he never got an apology. You know, his silence was effectively bought. So this got hushed away, put under the carpet, so never gets to see the light of day. And he didn't have his day in court to have justice. You know, for him, it wasn't about the money, but you know.
Sorry, I'm just a bit conscious of time. I think that, I mean, that is a shocking story, and I'm sure it's not an isolated case.
Yeah.
But for everybody on this call that's listening in, what do businesses need to do? I mean, as business leaders, obviously not let that happen.
Yeah.
But and SJ's talked to us about tracking and data and understanding exactly what the situation in your business is. But what can they do when it comes, you know, particularly around this legal point?
I think they just have to stand up and say, right, it's not good enough to be just not racist, or, you know, they have to be anti. They have to say, look, you know, hands up, mistakes have been made or whatever, but redress the problem. They need to inspire their workforce, reassure their workforce, not just on a one-to-one basis, but the whole organization. Say, right, we've looked at our data, we've checked, there is no ethnicity pay gap. You know, we had a similar conversation with Lindsay, our CEO. She took us through the whole company and said, right, we've checked the data, there is no discrepancies. So, and I say to employees now is the time to have that conversation. There has never been a better time to have that conversation. Ask those difficult questions, get people talking about these uncomfortable things, because the spotlight is shining on the situation. So now's the time to ask. And
also, you know, we need the law to change, don't we?
Absolutely, 100%.
We need hand raisers. We need people to put pressure on the government, not just as individuals, but to put pressure on the government that it has to change. I mean, as I said, I was genuinely shocked. I mean, I thought equal pay was equal pay, not just that, you know, and that burden of proof. I mean, that would, you know, going to tribunal would put people off anyway, but when you've got to be the one that's got to make the case, that's just so much harder, isn't it? Yeah. So thank you for that. Thank you for you know, sharing your friend's case with us. I'm sure it's not isolated. So I'm just going to move us on a little bit, because as I say, I'm conscious of time. So Supriya, so we know we need to measure, we know that we need to get the law changed, and we need to understand as business leaders what is happening with the law and what's our responsibility to our employees and to our business. But talk to us about, you know, for me, that's all hard stuff. What about the change of mindset that is needed about how people are viewed and categorised and thought of in the BAME community?
I think, you know, kind of a nice way of going into that is thinking about, actually, there are two things that we covered here. One is the gender pay gap, and the other one is the equal opportunities, sorry, I've just lost my thread.
Equal pay?
Thank you.
Equal pay.
And I think, you know, there's a clear difference between the two of those. The first is, you know, one is about being paid the same if you're doing the same job, but the other one is about having the same opportunities as everyone else, and looking at people's individual abilities and characteristics. And we talked about measurement and how characteristics comes into measurement. And I think one of the things that is really important to understand is we've looked at data and we know that we haven't captured everyone's data. Now this is data that people are filling in themselves. They're self-populating and have chosen to not state their ethnicity. And I think some of that is historical, because a lot of the data in the past has been used or may have been used to the disadvantage of those individuals. And actually, measurement actually was something that came in after equal pay became a thing, and equal opportunities became a thing. Prior to that, it was actually the norm not to report on race and not to report on ethnicity, because you could keep it out of the law. So I think there's a lot of changes that need to happen from a business standpoint, in just kind of being really clear on why we want to do this. And I know we've covered all of that. But if we think about individuals, we also need to be clear about the labels that we're using, and actually, are we clear about how people are identifying to begin with? You know, we're in London, one of the most multicultural cities there is in the world, and yet if you look at the general categorizations that you see, they're quite limiting. You know, they're generally around color and your kind of region of origin, and region is quite broad. The race disparity audit in October 2017, same time that Baroness McGregor-Smith did hers, actually highlighted that there are significant disparities, not only between ethnic groups, but also within ethnic groups. And it was talking about not only in their own cultural identities, but actually their performance and actually how their socioeconomic backgrounds and all those sorts of markers, I guess, and things that people would identify with.
So I completely agree. So you know, as business leaders, what's the one thing, and I'm going to start with you, Supriya, that they need to be doing? What's the one piece of advice that you would say to them in terms of changing the mindset and looking at the real person and not bunching everybody together? What can they actually do to change that? To start.
So one thing that they need to do is actually talk to their people and start to understand how they want to be identified, what their expectations are of the business, and how they want to be involved in the business and shaping that business. I think it needs to be a collective movement as opposed to just people at the top making decisions, and really truthfully understanding the makeup of their community. And I think in that way they'll be able to move forward together.
Brilliant. Okay, and I think that, you know, Esther, I'm going to move on to you next. We've talked about the importance of measurement, but to Supriya's point, if people just go, you know, with the very basics, they're not going to get that real understanding of who they've got in their team and how those individuals need to be managed and treated and developed and all of those things. So what's the thing that you would give to business leaders listening in, or not just business leaders, but individuals, to put pressure on their businesses?
Yeah, I think if you're a business leader, particularly if you're one of the 560 people that signed Creative Equals letter, get on with it. You've said you're going to do this. It's really complicated. And although it is complex, that you just follow national statistics, there are certain there's language, there's vernacular, there's a rhetoric, a way of tabulating that is correct. So get on with it and critically tell people that you're doing it. You almost need to make as public a statement as you can that this is something you're going to do. So you tell your employees you're doing it, you tell your clients that you're doing it, you tell your shareholders that you're going to do it, because that's what forces it to the top of the to-do list.
Accountable. Okay. And last but certainly not least, Rupen.
Yeah, similar sort of thing. Yeah, so it's a similar thing. I mean, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You know, get the data out there. You know, it needs to be reported on. And actually, as a leader, you know, you just need to get up there, inspire the confidence of your workforce, and publish that data. Have those difficult conversations. Make yourself vulnerable, and have that conversation, and that will help.
And sorry, can you just remind everybody, because if they didn't have a pen or anything to the charter, where do they go to get themselves to sign up for that?
Yeah, so it's the Race at Work Charter, and it's run by Business in the Community, so BITC. So they can sign up to that. And the other thing to sign up is the government petition on mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting, which you can find on the government website.
Well, listen, I hope that we're going to shift the dial through all the people that are listening in here and go and sign up to both of those things. And put pressure on the government to change the law. Thank you, everybody. You've been an amazing panel, and I'm sure that I wish we had a bit longer, but we've already had our 5-minute warning, so I don't want to get into trouble with anyone at MediaTel. Thank you, Rupen, SJ, and Supriya, and all the team at MediaTel. It's been really fascinating, and I've learned a lot. Thank you, and I hope everybody's enjoyed the whole event. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.